There's been a ton of hype for Apple's M3 MacBook Air coming later this year, but unfortunately, we've been seeing some rumors claiming that it's actually getting delayed until 2024. So even though I really hope this isn't true, I want to keep you guys informed on all the leaks. So in this video, I'm going to give you 5 reasons why this delay could make sense, as well as my own personal prediction on when it'll be launched. So let's get into the first reason, which is the leaker TechReeve on Twitter. Just over a week ago, TechReeve claimed that the M3 powered Macs were delayed until 2024, which was a huge surprise to me until I found out why. But the crazy thing is that it matches new updated info from a very reliable leaker, Ming-Chi Kuo, which he posted on Twitter, mentioning that the 15-inch MacBook Air would get the M2 chip and that the M3 chip would only enter mass production in the second half of 2023, slightly ahead of M3 Pro and M3 Max mass production. Now that detail is very important because Apple's chips usually start mass production a while before the launch of the actual product getting that chip. For example, TSMC started 3nm chip production at the end of December, which is almost certainly Apple's A17 Bionic chip for the iPhone 15 Pro, but that's only coming in September, so that's 9 months ahead of schedule. And then in 2021, the M1 Pro and Max chips, which everyone mistakenly thought would be called the M2, entered mass production in April, but it wasn't until 6 months later that the chips actually launched in October with the redesigned MacBook Pros. So if Ming-Chi Kuo is right and the M3 chip starts mass production in the second half of this year, which begins in July, 6 months later at a minimum would be January of next year if the M3 sticks to the same timeline as before. So if the M3 somehow does get launched this fall, it would be on an extremely tight schedule with limited chip supply, and that's exactly what reason number 2 is. Limited supply of TSMC's 3nm chips, which is actually the main reason for all of the M3 MacBook Air hype, since it should be insanely efficient and fast by my personal estimations based on leaked A17 Bionic benchmark scores that were shared by TechReeve, but it was actually a huge leak from Weibo's user 937840, who also said that the progression of the M3 would be after the A17, backing up what Kuo said. But then on March 20th, TechReeve came back and said that TSMC is surprisingly struggling with 3nm chips, leading to lower goals for the A17, specifically saying that both the yield and performance of 3nm are below their target, which means that we might not see benchmark scores as high as the A17 leak, as well as my own M3 estimations. He then revealed his reasoning, which was that apparently TSMC's 3nm chip yield was less than 50%, which is terrible. And then over a month later, on April 25th, we got reports from other sources that TSMC is in fact struggling to make enough 3nm chips for Apple's A17 and M3 chips, now having approximately 55% yield, which is still bad. And then 3 days later, TechReeve told us how he knew TSMC was struggling, and it was the fact that M3 should have started production in the spring if it had proceeded on a normal roadmap or timeline, but according to Ming-Chi Kuo, it's only happening in the second half of this year. So because of that, he revealed that the M3 has been delayed until next year, and even the A17 will face similar yield issues, not in the form of a delay, but instead having reduced performance to compensate for the lower yields. So basically, the main idea is that 55% yields on M3 chips isn't enough for both the M3 and A17, leading to the delay of M3 Max to 2024, which TechReeve confirmed again on May 2nd. Now getting into reason number 3, there's a rumor going around that Apple has a huge stockpile of M2 chips laying around that they're struggling to sell off, and there's actually really good evidence for this. The rumor comes from Hachi Tech on Twitter, who basically said that Apple has a severe oversupply of M2 chips, even suggesting that the 24-inch iMac is about to be garbage because originally it was supposed to get the M3 M3 chip, but now they're gonna give it the M2 just to sell more M2 chips. The reason for that is of course because they need to find ways to sell more M2 chips, and apparently that's another reason why Apple has decided to give the 15-inch MacBook Air the M2, which is expected next month, and this has already been confirmed by many sources including Min-Chi Kuo and Mark Gurman. Haji Tech even said that the Apple TV gaming console is coming soon, potentially also with an M2 chip. He essentially said that the M2 Max sales numbers are so bad that he wouldn't be surprised if Apple gave every iPad an M2 chip just to sell off more of them. Need proof that idea is true? Well, Apple reportedly stopped production of their new M2 chip in January and February because their M2 Max just weren't selling well enough, and that's something that hasn't happened before for a 6-month-old new chip. And then, when they eventually resumed production, it was only at 50% of the rate of previous years. This proves that Apple's M2 chips were not getting sold fast enough, and they likely have a huge stockpile of them that they don't want to make even bigger, especially with the M3 chip already on its way. So basically, a big reason to delay the M3 until 2024 is to give the M2 chips time to sell off. And that leads us into reason number 4. The rest of the industry is delaying and canceling 3nm chip products, especially Intel, who recently canceled even more of TSMC's 3nm projects. So the idea here is that Apple can essentially stretch out their M2 line, especially since the competition still hasn't even caught up to the M2, even though it was a stopgap release. So instead of rushing to launch M3 products so quickly, they can release more M2 chip products that are still gonna sell very well anyway, and then when the M3 comes out, everyone who bought M1 or M2 chip Max will feel like they're missing out because of the huge performance and efficiency gains, and they'll be even more likely to upgrade sooner, even if they wait until the M4, which will also be on 3nm. And because of that, we're likely getting the M2 15-inch MacBook Air, and we could even end up with more crappy M2 chip updates later this year, which will end up being press releases instead of being revealed at events, including probably an M2 iPad Air update later this fall. And now, finally, for reason number 5, we have macroeconomic factors, or essentially the looming recession. The big idea here is that the M3 chip is going to be a huge deal since it'll be using the industry's first 3nm chips from TSMC with huge improvements. I'm personally predicting the M3 MacBook Air to have the best battery life in any MacBook. So if Apple has such a great product coming, why risk releasing it during a recession where people simply aren't buying Macs anyway? That could even be why Apple recently delayed plans for their 27-inch display with mini LED and ProMotion technology, as well as maybe even delaying the overdue Mac Pro. People aren't really buying Macs right now, and we know that for sure because Mac sales have dropped 40% year over year, even worse than all the other PC brands, likely because Mac products are the most expensive. On top of that, many companies are cutting their budgets, including everything from products to advertising, which is why we're seeing so many layoffs as well as business closures like news media companies. Just look at Google, who is cutting costs by buying less staplers, tape, and of course, giving their employees cheap Chromebooks by default instead of other nice laptops like MacBooks. And I'm sure other companies are doing the same thing to save money. On top of that, Apple's main iPhone manufacturing company, Foxconn, just announced a 56% drop in profits compared to last year. So in this environment, companies are doing everything they can to save money because people simply aren't spending money like they used to. So in the case of the M3 MacBook Air, why release it when we're in the middle of a recession when they can just keep giving us simple M2 chip swapped Macs until the economy starts recovering again, hopefully early next year, being great timing for the M3 MacBook Air. And now let me finish off with my personal prediction. I think that even though all of these reasons make sense, I believe Apple will still release the M3 MacBook Air in the fall simply because it matches up to their 1.5-year update cycle. And even if the supply of 3nm chips is low, I believe they could reveal the M3 Max in November, but with limited supply, so it could sell out very quickly until chip supply improves later in December or January. So there you guys go, those were my thoughts. Hopefully you enjoyed this video, and if you did, click the circle above to subscribe for more videos like this one. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.